If you are a medical professional, this is the podcast that is going to influence your day-to-day practice the most, guaranteed.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Absolutely. The time that you're able to get back with something like this technology is just, I don't think that, well, there certainly hasn't been anything in my 5 years of practice that has influenced me this much.
And I think when we, like, something that we probably haven't touched on too much, but we probably should touch on it more, is how high the rate is of burnout amongst health professionals. And I know for physios,
Oh, wait, sorry. It's my fuck up.
is that mine too loud?
Yeah, it was my fault. Just speak again.
I was just going to talk about like how high the burnout rates are for health professionals.
Sorry. If you are a medical practitioner, this podcast is going to be and have the most influence over your day-to-day practice that you've ever listened to.
Yeah, probably the most revolutionary thing in the last 40 years, 100 years.
Yeah,
more?
It's got to be there. It's got to be there. I mean, I think of the only people that I think aren't going to embrace this technology are people that still believe that paper notes is the way to go. You know,
it would be hard to progress to this if you're still on paper notes.
Yeah, and we've done, this is episode 108, and we haven't endorsed anything in 2.5 years. Like, properly said, this is something we are fully behind, that we really believe in. We haven't.
No, but I back this. I'm behind it. I believe in it.
Yeah.
And something that I feel is really important to touch on, because I don't think that we talk about this enough in our normal, like, day-to-day podcast, is how high the rates are of burnout in physios in particular. I know that the average life expectancy of a physio is about 7 years of practice before they have a career change or move into a different field or stop working as a physio for some reason, because burnout rates are so high. And in this podcast, we do touch on that briefly, because what we know about burnout is that it's usually not to do with the clinical stuff, because that's the reason that a lot of people get involved in healthcare, is because they actually enjoy that face-to-face contact, helping people, talking to people. A lot of it's around the additional jobs that you have to do as a physio that you might not have been aware of, that start to almost like creep up on you and bury you in some ways without a means to an end in some ways. So I really believe that this is a way to help mitigate that.
Yeah, and if you're wondering what we're talking about, it's Heidi AI, which is one company amongst many that is able to listen and basically, really simply, take notes for you and summarize your notes in whichever way that you please. Write your letters, help you do your reports. And as Kelly was saying, burnout in podiatry as well, and I don't know what the rates are in other health professions, but I know in podiatry around 3 to 5 to 7 years is quite high, and you see this slow dropout rate. And you can never blame one factor, just like with anything in healthcare, but you have to think, and it seems logical to think, that admin tasks away from clinical tasks have to play some role. I certainly know that they do for me, and I certainly know that they do for you in some respect as well.
Yeah, well, it's that it's hard to maintain that workload, I suppose, when there's so many other things that you need to attend to, but not enough time to be able to do it. And then that does certainly eat into time outside of your work hours. So I think that this can certainly make an impact on things like that.
Yeah, and I wonder, when we talk about kind of new technology and adoption of anything that's new, whether it be tech or an idea, and we talk about this in the podcast, how there is an adoption phase of anything. And you should, and we should always have skepticism with anything that we're going to adopt, especially in healthcare, because there's always this added layer of complexity, because you're dealing with very sensitive information and people are coming to you with sensitive information. And I know if you're listening to this, the first question we had, which we answer in the podcast, and the first question that people have asked me directly, is around confidentiality and storing data, the real concerns that we have, which we addressed in the episode. But that still isn't much of an excuse to not potentially try or think about this technology. Just because it might seem a bit foreign or a bit unknown isn't a reason not to try something or even consider thinking about it.
Yeah, and we came into this podcast recording with Tom with skepticism around this, and that has completely disappeared for me. I don't have any concern about that data being stored because it's not, which is what we talk about in the podcast. It's just being transcribed in the spot, so it's not really something that needs to be a concern.
Yeah, it's not stored on any, and he's going to speak about it better, but it's not stored.
It's not recorded and stored.
Yeah,
it's transcribed into patient notes directly.
But it is stored on the web page. It is stored on the browser because it has to be stored somewhere.
But you can delete it straight away. As soon as you've turned it into a note, you can delete it.
Yeah, so there's the option to delete it at the end of every day. There's the option to delete it instantly, and there is the option to keep it there. But the major concern, again, is where the data is, because that's what people are going to be most concerned of, or that's what we think and we believe is people are going to be wondering if your servers were to be breached or this company's servers were to be breached, where would that information be and would people have access to it? And it seems as though they don't. And I tell the patients in clinic that I am deleting the notes at the end of every day, and I actually have that setting turned on. So I check, I delete, and my notes are done anyway, so I don't actually need the information. And I found this really interesting, and Tom speaks about that, is even if somebody wanted to get the information back, they actually can't. So even they can't get the information back.
Yeah. And it's just awesome though, because like my notes just have been getting worse and worse as the years have gone on. And I can't even explain to you how much information there is now. So when I follow up with a patient and I've used Heidi for their previous consult, I could tell you anything that I want to tell you about them from the notes that it's recorded. That's relevant, of course. It doesn't record small talk and things like that, but the relevant information's there. And I just feel so all over it when I'm seeing them again, because there's obviously things that you kind of just forget from session to session. And now I'm promptly reminded.
Yeah, the use case, it's funny, each week that I have been using it, I'm realizing there's more of a use case than what there was in the previous week. I'll use an example from last week. I was seeing someone with some plantar second forefoot pain, and their goal was to get back to 7 kilometers of walking every day. So this is the second time that I'd seen them. Things were improving, and we were basically just starting almost a return to walk program. And I went on this big, long-winded, basically paragraph saying that, go out and walk for 20 minutes. If it's feeling really good, you can progress by 5 minutes. If it's not feeling really good and it's above a 3 out of 10, I want you to regress by 5 minutes. If you're feeling that you're not as confident with it, just do 2 or 3 walks and then progress by 5 minutes. And it recorded all that as succinctly as I just said it, but better. And I thought, that's awesome, because the next time that I see you, I'm going to know exactly what we talked about, which, you kind of remember anyway, but I'm not going to sit here and say that I record my notes in that much detail, because I don't. But then I realized, I thought, this is exactly what we spoke about. Why don't I just copy and paste this and email it to you? And that way you have exactly what I just spoke about, and I don't have to write the email out. So it's just continues to evolve every time I use it, which is really cool.
That is cool. That is cool.
Yeah, I think the topic about burnout, it's probably the most motivating reason why we wanted to have this podcast. And obviously it's not clinical. We're not talking about tendons or bones. And you and I aren't going to run through our clinical week. But the idea that someone would be able to use this technology and feel more passionate about their profession because they're not as tired, or they're able to spend more time with their family, or in my case, I got to go out for a run before the sun went down, which was really cool. I'd usually have to stay back and do reports and letters. We work with lots of other health professions, so we're doing lots of letters and reports and lots of follow-up, and a lot of that is done, and I'm not doing extra work at home.
Well, even last week, how much more time did we get to actually spend together at home because you weren't at work doing your notes? I feel like we got to catch up like every afternoon, where we usually don't, because you're usually at work finishing notes or letters or working or something.
Yeah.
I feel like we spent so much more time together last week.
Yeah, it's great. And we speak about all this in the episode about how the idea kind of came about, and how Tom is seeing it used in other professions, because Tom is a medical doctor, and originally that's where it was created, and then as with anything, it fans out into allied health, which is so cool. The the reason that we wanted to be able to share this episode is twofold. We wanted to address any of the real concerns that people had, and we asked some of the questions around the legality of it, where the information is stored, how it's best utilized, what's coming up, which is really important. And secondly, we wanted to be able to have people have more of a chance to use it. So down below, it is an affiliate link. This is our first affiliate link in 2.5 years. Unfortunately, you don't actually get any money off, but you do get to try Pro for 30 days. So when you sign up now, you get 7 days, and that's standard. But if you use the link, you get 30 days to use
try
the Pro.
it. Yeah.
And that gives you the ability to create your own templates, which you can create and mold over the course of a couple of weeks, of a couple of months, to actually record the notes exactly how you want to, which is so cool. So
yeah, and I think it's worthwhile giving yourself that 30 days, because the 7 days that you would normally get using the program, it gives you enough time to start to get the hang of it, but the 30 days will give you an opportunity to really understand it and know how to use it most effectively. And I feel like we've both been able to maximize its use since over the last 30 days, I suppose, whereas the first 7 was probably just getting used to it a little bit more. So I think give yourself that time to understand it, and yeah, if you find it useful, then certainly we have.
yeah, and we think we did a pretty good job of trying to address all the questions that the people have. We got quite a few through the socials, but if you have any other questions around the usability, please just feel free to send me a message. I've used it for a little bit longer than you, and a bit more. Probably teased out a little bit of the issues that you might have. And as Kelly said, for the 7 days, it takes a little bit of time, just like with any technology, to get used to it. But this is one of those things where I am so motivated to tell people to push over that initial hump of learning how to use it, because the time and the energy that you get back is pretty unreal. And there hasn't been anything like this really in healthcare.
Well, I was
going
to just say, I've tried one of the other platforms, and I definitely find Heidi to be way more user friendly. So one of the other platforms that I signed up for, this was probably a couple of months ago, I found it to be a little bit clunky, and it just wasn't as user friendly as I find Heidi to be. So it's pretty easy to get used to it fairly immediately, I would say. And then, yeah, it's a game changer.
Yeah. You've got to have, as we do, you have to have some skepticism about where the technology will go. But as long as you're willing to be open-minded, I think that really you just stay aware of what could potentially come, and keep up to date with the updates that they give out via email and via the app as well, and just watch the space of AI. Of course, and this is on the website, they have all the information in the initial form that you can actually give to people. And just to have a quick run through, so we repeat it, because I think that's probably the most important part. Consent is definitely required, and then telling people, hey, we're going to use this technology, this is what it's like, this is okay. And we wanted to have the podcast so people that listen to this, if they're using the technology, feel confident to answer the questions, because people might say, well, then what happens to my data? And you can confidently say, well, this is what's happening. And all the resources are on the website, which will be below. But otherwise, if you have any other questions, please send us a message. We haven't been using it along with some people, and if we can't answer any of the questions, we'll be able to direct you to people who can.
Yep.
Welcome back to the Sports Medicine Project. Now, as always, we have a very, very exciting guest, but probably the most different guest we have had on all 107 episodes. We have Dr. Tom McKelly joining us from somewhere in Australia, which he's certainly gonna get to. But we're here to talk about Heidi AI, and as you follow the social media, you would have seen that I've been posting about it for a while. Very exciting for this episode. But welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Blake. Pleasure to be here from cold Melbourne. Yeah, excited to share with all the listeners.
Yeah, I was just on a call about an hour ago with someone from they were from Melbourne and Adelaide, and it sounded pretty miserable down there. Not to say where you live is bad, but it didn't sound too nice. But it's not much better up here, is it?
It's been raining so much up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, proper winter for once. But yeah, no, I think I was really happy to get your reach out. And yeah, excited to share more about sort of how Heidi works. But yeah, answer any questions you have.
Yeah, so tell us, I mean, this podcast is about, what Heidi is, how it's gonna help people and hopefully change a lot of clinical practice. And one of the main things is give clinicians back a lot of time and hopefully be able to spend more time talking and listening to people. Can you tell us what your backstory is before we talk about kind of
Sure.
Heidi AI and your medical background and kind of how this came to fruition?
Yeah. So reintroduction for everyone. So I'm Tom. I'm a doctor by background. So I worked in public hospitals, mainly like Royal Melbourne and the Alfred down in Victoria for about 4 years after graduating. Before medicine, I studied math. So I was always interested in we kind of learned like the pen and paper of AI. So it's sort of like how to predict patterns or like turn data into algorithms that you can use for different things. So, predict patient risk scores or all sorts of different stuff. So definitely always had a bit of a technical streak, like was interested in other things. Um, and then in medicine, I had the first kind of brush with AI in sort of 2015 range. I think for anyone who has like a Google Home or some sort of assistant that they've used before, that's kind of how those things work. That era of technology was kind of interesting. Like if you ask a question about the weather, the AI figures out what you're asking about, and then has some sort of pre-canned response.
Mm.
So I was involved in a tutoring business. We used that AI tech to build some interesting tools for the students that we tutored and do support and a couple other things. But for me, that was like a kind of I don't know, like an obsession that kind of stuck. We yeah, so we I had a really fun experience with that tutoring business, but was obviously, studying and wanted to be a doctor. So went out to start working as an intern in 2018. And then in kind of like 2019, 2020, some of the technology that now powers like ChatGPT and some of the AI that people might have seen was starting to come out. It wasn't as good as it is today, but the initial prototypes of models that could write started to appear, and yeah, was pretty excited. Like I hated writing notes. I not just writing notes. Like there's so many different jobs that clinicians do that aren't really what we went into it for. So I was going down like a surgical training path. Was doing a lot of trauma for almost 6 months during COVID and ICU and all sorts of stuff. And the part of the job that kept me from home the most and was the most frustrating was just all the documentation that I used to have to do. So that was the pain I had. And then so when I first saw these models come out, that was the first thing that immediately became obvious to me. Like maybe not ready for prime time yet at that time, but if this could take a transcript of a visit and write a clinical note and then write all the other stuff that I need to get paid or to refer to someone else, um, that would just be amazing, time saving, and then there'd be lots of other things you could build from that. So built kind of early prototypes. We focused mainly in GP land from like 2022 and last year, probably through to about like the end of last year. For about 2 years, we were again before Chat GPT, so it was still a bit early. So it was a bit sci-fi, showing like, you know, well, like if you do this or you do a telehealth visit, like look, it can write a note for you, but usually just freak people out. And then and then last year the sentiment just changed. Everyone was kind of interested or excited, like how could this help me? And we kind of pivoted to focus the whole company on this since the end of last year, and yeah, haven't looked back. Launched like the free model of the product so people can use Heidi to generate notes for free. I think that made sense to us because it takes a lot of time to get used to using these
Mm.
tools, and also there's some it kind of fits with our mission. Like our mission is to try to halve the time it takes to deliver great care, and like enough people would pay that it would work, and then like counselors, nurses, all sorts of people that maybe couldn't otherwise pay for it get to use it, which feels like a really good thing to do for the world, not just make lots of money out of it. So yeah, we launched at the start of this year and had tens of thousands of clinicians join so far, and kind of really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that the technology, I mean, when we graduated, I mean, we know people that still take pen and paper notes, let alone
That's crazy.
yeah. It just it gives me a little bit of just it makes me feel some kind of way. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, we need to get you to a computer. But and then to think now that it can listen and we've obviously been playing around with it. We could obviously wear an allied health. I mean, we work with a bunch of sports doctors at the clinic, and every person that they see, they have to dictate notes, dictate a letter back to the specialist, back to the GP. Did you initially find that it was somewhat similar where, because obviously being a doctor, I think it's a lot more common practice for doctors to dictate the note or the report or the initial consultation, then that gets sent off somewhere and someone dictates it into a letter and then it comes out. Like, were you finding that was somewhat similar of an idea, or you practice doing that way?
Yeah, so we used drag and like nuances
Mm. Yeah,
dictation at
that's
the
what the doctors
hospital.
use. Yeah.
Um, and it was I guess my impression of it was that um it was a time saving on the typing side. So if you weren't great at typing, it definitely saved time. But for doctors of my generation, like, we studied with computers. We're
Mm.
not all like t touch typists, but we're usually, for me, the difference between doing like the voice to text or typing it was probably, 5-10%, wasn't that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so for me, I don't know, like I'm sure there are people that and we've found since we launched the product, a lot of people use it for dictation, but for me, it was more the problem about turning like a visit, like the context of what you do in that visit, into other things, not just like a letter, but kind of anything.
Mm.
Like an example is sometimes when we sell to hospitals or large groups, um, sometimes like the administrators or coders will use the notes for billing and coding purposes. And it's interesting. So it's really like I think that's the exciting thing that I thought that these things could do. But dictation, yeah, surprisingly, is actually quite useful.
Mm.
And this you can kind of dictate in a special way. So you can almost like talk to Heidi as if Heidi's like a doctor stuck in the computer or something. And you can say like, oh, put together like a classic like acute ACL injury. This person's like played basketball, had a hard pivot and heard of snap. Has all the classic examination findings. I want to send a letter back to the GP, and then usually, like give or take, it will nail it first shot. And add in the findings that most likely found, like
Mm.
positive draw test and like all the things that you would have included. So yeah, I think there are still some doctors that are really like bound to that old fashioned
Mm.
dictation. They use Heidi exactly the way they've always done it. They just like it because it's a little better at fixing mistakes for them, which is
Mm.
fine. But for me, the magic was watching like, the fast talking, unstructured patient turn into like a perfectly structured note instantly. That's the thing for me that
Mm.
still might like it just writes it better than I would. It remembers things or like orders it a bit better than me. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, there's just there's so much to talk about. I just don't know where to start because we've got quite a few questions, but we
Yeah.
probably should start from it's the topic that we've thought about the most. It's the topic easily that people have asked us the most on
Mhm.
socials and when we said you were coming on, and that's the medico-legal confidentiality, which is the big thing at the moment. Data
Yep.
breaches. We know that as we more kind of come online, we need to be more protective of our data, where it gets stored, that kind of thing. So one of the most common questions was around like consent
Yep.
and where does the data go? Because we know that people are going to ask us whether they consent and go, great, I consent for you to do this, but where is it going? Has it been breached? All that kind of stuff. So I guess if we
Yep.
just focus on the consent side, how do you kind of structure it? What's the details and how does it best work?
Yeah, yeah. And it totally makes sense. Like, that would be my first question as well. So, um, yeah, so I'll walk through maybe like the data flow, but then
Mm.
the different issues kind of baked in. So, um, yeah, when you build a visit on Heidi, basically what's happening is only Heidi ever stores the transcript and the note that you create on the product. So, as you hit the record or transcribe button, audio is being turned into that transcript real time. There's no actual identifiable recording that's being stored
Mm.
that's kind of permanent in any way. Um, Sometimes we have backups and other things that will exist on your side, but it's not something that we're permanently storing. So there's no scenario where we get breached and there's all these audio recordings and things
Yeah.
that obviously would, like, it's literally the most sensitive thing, like the
Information. Yeah. Yeah.
patient clinician interaction. So it's really important that not only is the audio not recorded, but everything that happens on Heidi's side, so now cloud servers, we have an ISO certification. So that's like a kind of like a world industry standard of
Mm.
being based, and you get externally audited. So you can't just, it's not like you just submit and get it. You get audited. I think it's once a year, and then that includes like white hat hacking. So people find vulnerabilities and
Mm.
it's everything from like ID cards at the door to training of all the staff to the way that all the databases are structured and what we store and how we communicate with users. So it's quite extensive. So
Mm.
that's more like the security and system architecture side. So we again, we've been around since 2019 was when we first started building the product. So we're a bit further ahead. Like Australian privacy principles, which is sort of the minimum standard that you have to comply with here. It's actually kind of a low bar, honestly.
Mm.
Like GDPR in Europe, where we operate as well, is much higher standard, and we're compliant with them as well. Um,
Mm.
as far as data flow, so yeah, uh, note audio getting turned into a transcript. Of course, Heidi has to store the transcript, so we still have to store information to be able to make the product work. And that transcript then gets turned into the clinical note using Heidi's AI. Um, and you have all the options in the settings to set up the data retention how you like. So um, everything from people store all the sessions on Heidi indefinitely, those transcripts, to setting a setting that deletes all your sessions every day. It's up to you. You can
Okay.
set up if
Okay.
you want.
Yeah.
If you delete the session, then we can't recover it. Like there's nothing. Like we can't even access the data of your sessions, um, even if we wanted to. So it's it's kind of interesting. Like I'd say clinicians so far are kind of polarized. One group, you know, does all the due diligence, but says, okay, you're secure. Like probably in most cases, we're more compliant and more secure than whatever EHR you're using. And because of how sensitive this task is. So
Mm.
they're fine. Like we'll store all the transcripts. The benefit obviously is now I have historical records. So if a patient asks me for, a certificate or something new that I need their previous initial consult for, I've still got it. So
Mm.
that's the benefit of storing it. The
Mm.
other case is I just don't want anything that isn't in my EHR. That's totally
Yeah.
fine as well. And just you can just delete all the sessions as you go. Once you're
And
done
it
and you
sounds better
yeah.
from a consent point of view too. Like if you're telling people, hey, we're going to
Mm,
record this initial consultation and
Mm.
it's going to be generated, I can promise you, and you will sign for this in your consent. I'm deleting everything at the end of the day and it's gone forever. It's just for this little bit, which sounds a little bit
I
mm,
better.
think so. I had my last patient today. I was having a chat to them,
mm,
a regular that I see quite often. I was like telling them that we were chatting to you this afternoon, and
mm,
her like instinct was that it was quite scary and she was unsure about it, and
mm,
that feeling of having her private information stored somewhere. And
mm,
her concern was that once AI takes over and
Mm.
just keeps going, then there's no bringing that information back. So because AI learns from it and things like that, was her biggest concern, which might be
yeah,
that might be a little bit extreme,
Over
maybe.
exaggeration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I guess it's valid. Like there's if
for
one
sure.
person's concerned about it, then other people will be as well.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's you've sort of highlighted that that's probably not a concern that needs to be
Mm,
had. Yeah.
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 And then for that point, so we don't use any patient identifiable data for training, like anything like that.
Mm.
We do have in our terms that we use aggregated data for improvement. So that's de-identified data, so never
Mm.
identifiable data. But the reason is like we need to have some way to improve the product. Like we want to know if it's doing well, address bias and like other concerns, like about making sure that the way Heidi's behaving is fair, we're not let's say writing about certain conditions not as well as other conditions.
Mm.
So it's kind of like an important QA task, I think. But for patient identifiable data, yeah, never used for training.
Mm.
And I agree. So for consent, that was one thing I didn't get to was we definitely recommend that you have an explicit consent process.
Mm.
Uh, the law, like the law when it comes down to it, is a little vague, honestly. So
Mm.
it's not, if you're recording audio and storing audio, that's clear. You have to
Mm.
do two-party consent. In Australia, at least, it's a little hard. So transcription, like you could say that it falls under like a tool that you're using to create your notes, like in a similar way that you use your EHR or
Mm.
shortcuts or other things.
Mm.
Um, but regardless, like I think it's sensible to
Yeah.
make sure that you consent them. And we have a bunch of forms and resources on the website that we think we link it from the product now, but you can
Mm.
look them up and find. And you can even use them if you're not using Heidi, if you're using another tool. And we've seen clinicians add it as part of like a new patient form or
Yeah,
something like that.
just down the bottom, definitely.
Yeah.
That's what we've done, and having the conversation, like when they sit down. So if someone comes in, great, I'm Blake, the podiatrist. Great, how did you find us? Just
Mm.
before we get started, we're using this new technology. This is what happened. This is why we wanted to have the conversation to clearly say and truthfully say the data's not stored anywhere. We delete it straight up.
Yeah.
Everything's de-identified. Do you mind if it listens, transcribes, and notes, and then automatically deletes? And it
Yeah.
allows me to have more time with you and haven't had
Exactly.
anyone say no yet, which has been really good. I find having that conversation is so much clearer because on the initial form you can't give it any nuance because it's just like, hey, do you
Yeah.
consent for this? And someone's like, what do you mean? What's
I don't
this?
want, yeah, I don't want
Yeah,
AI like training on me or
yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Like that's how I when I used to test these things out in practice, that's how I would always consent as well. Just better to have the conversation. Um, and usually like I would always sneak in the benefit. Like the benefit is I don't like have to do the computer during the session. Like
yeah.
I'll have a better note. You can even throw in the like I can easily share a summary with you or something like that.
Mm,
And and yeah, like obviously for really sensitive encounters where like you don't want to maybe bias it, like more for the psychologists or other scenarios where like obviously you can use your best judgment, like you don't have to use it.
yeah,
But for the everyday consult, it's pretty kind of standard. Most I haven't had many issues. Like we have lots of people using it and it doesn't seem like a big issue. It's kind of interesting, like we've actually seen the opposite where clinicians have asked us to recover stuff they've deleted for whatever reason. That's like one of the more common queries we get, and it's like,
yeah,
sorry, like we can't get it back. Like it's gone forever.
yeah.
So yeah, I think hopefully that ends. I'm trying to think if there's anything else important. Oh, and one other thing is like indemnity insurance and like
Mm,
liability, I think is worth mentioning as well. So um yeah, so we do have platform insurance on Heidi. So if Heidi makes like some catastrophic error or like makes a horrible mistake, that and obviously there's some balance of responsibility, right? So like you're still responsible for your notes. You have to check that it's
mm,
accurate at the end of the
mm.
day. But we do have our own insurance that covers clinicians for any possible suit or thing that could come for having used Heidi in a clinical consult. Um, but of course, like, we're not covering you for malpractice or
Yeah,
missing off things or all the usual stuff. But more for like Heidi working properly and technically being accurate and all these things.
yeah,
Um, and then, so that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is with your indemnity insurers, of course, you still have to ultimately check with your own. But generally, having spoken to most of the Australian ones, they are not sure how it's going to play out. There's kind of both cases. One case would be that, so basically, most uh, kind of legal suits that clinicians ever get come usually they lose because they don't have good documentation. So a lot of them actually want to encourage the clinicians to use a tool like this, because then they're more likely to have thorough documentation and like
mm,
timely notes and all these things. Um, and even with the retention, same thing. Like now you've got a transcript of exactly what happened. So there's no he said, she said. Like you literally have evidence of
yeah.
what was said. But again, like plays both ways. So you could say that, oh, but then if you're a bad doctor or a bad clinician, or now you've got evidence of all your badness. So I don't
Mm.
know. It can go both ways.
The lighter's not too bad. That's not an issue. Like if the notes say that you're saying some pretty horrible stuff, well, that's on you, not on them,
Yeah,
not on
exactly.
Heidi.
Um, but anyway, so that it like we just try to be the tool. Like we put the control back on
Mm,
your side. So in the settings, you can decide the retention policy. You can delete all the sessions as you wish. And we've tried to be sensible as we can be because obviously for us, like it's existential. Like if we have ever have a breach or ever have any issue or thing that goes wrong here, like we're stuffed. Like the whole
yeah,
company's down the tube. So um yeah, so we take it really seriously and do what we can to try to set the standards when there aren't any often.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Do you have any more questions on
Not so much
confidentiality?
on confidentiality, no.
I got one more. You did mention it obviously records the transcript and some of the feedback. And I've even seen that myself. It's not 100% perfect, but no AI that I have ever used to date is.
Mm.
I have just been trying to get into the habit as best I can is because you can, which is really cool. You can actually edit on Heidi AI, then copy and paste that across. So how you used to be editing, copy and paste it across, then edit it that way.
Mm.
Um, I'm finding that I'm trying to get into the habit straight away of anything that it records. Let's say that it might take me 10 minutes to write the notes, or let's say 20 minutes to write the notes and generate a report. Instead of saying I get 20 minutes back, I'm still spending 5 or 10 minutes of that,
Yeah.
thoroughly reading the detail. And that way I'm still getting half the time back. So it's definitely a win for not much. I'm not
Mm.
losing anything. And as you said, it's just if you're reading the detail, I'm changing things here and there. And obviously that gets better over time. But that's the way I've been trying to deal with that. And it's honestly not that much that I'm changing, which is pretty interesting. So I feel as if you do that, you can be pretty clear. And it's crazy the amount of detail. I told someone today they had some forefoot pain and they had a flare up where they tried to do 5 kilometers of walking, which was just too much at the time. So I said,
Yeah.
great, let's cut it back. I want you to start with 10 minutes of walking and then day on, day off, I want you to increase it by 5 minutes. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll do that. Then we'll catch up. And if it's still sore, we can look at this. If it's not sore, we're going to look to progress. And it
Mm.
recorded that whole accurately and the whole thing, progressions, regressions. And I know that I would document that pretty well, but I'm not going to sit there and say that I would document it better than what Heidi did. And it was amazing because everything was there. So I'm finding that, as you said, with the confidentiality, sorry, not confidentiality, the medico legal stuff, it's better if you are verbalizing what you're saying because you know what you're saying is safe and you can check
Mm.
that. But I'm finding it's covering, well, for me, example, it's covering me more if anything ever was to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I guess like the busier the clinician and the more the notes of the problem, the worse they generally get. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that's good to hear. And we are spending heaps of time. So we recently released a transcript tab, like for people that have started using it, so you can now see the whole transcript.
Mm,
Um, and we'll increasingly make it a bit easier to see like when we wrote something, what was the sourcing or like the reference of like where we got that from the transcript or like the other information we might have. So if we're doing integrations or you're pasting other context into Heidi,
mm,
um, yeah, yeah, no, sounds good. I think we covered that pretty well.
it's really good.
I'm
Do you
good
want
for
to ask?
confidentiality.
Yeah, good. What topic you want
I
to
have a question about, I guess, like maybe like the future of Heidi in
Yeah.
not missing things potentially. So if will it be able to maybe prompt you if it's sort of picking up any potential red flags or pathologies that could be a little bit more sinister? Like could it be prompting you to maybe do any clinical assessments or prompting you to refer back to GP or anything like that from what it's heard? Like is that a possibility for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so it's definitely in our product roadmap. I think so for us for regulatory and like medical device status, we draw a line pretty hard that we're not for diagnosis and management today. That's where like right now that's where it sits. But yeah, I think that's really exciting. And there are different ways to do it. So um the one that makes the most sense to me is to be able to link different guidelines. So if you have, let's say, like the hospital where you work or the clinic where you work, you have a set of guidelines or referral pathways, or it could literally be anything, honestly. Basically, the way I see it working is you can set that up in Heidi or upload those resources to Heidi. And then what will happen is we'll have Heidi, which is still writing your note. And then separately, there'll be almost like a little AI worker, like a junior, that's looking through the guidelines all the time. And based on what the transcript, where the transcript has gotten up to, trying to find relevant things that would apply to the patient you're seeing. So, like a quick link to a patient explainer for a certain condition, or yeah, like different condition
Like
pathways or
the
yeah.
sensitivity test would be cool. Like give you
Mm,
like these four, like if you combine these four tests, your sensitivity of it being a tibial stress fracture is over 85%, like hop and tenderness.
yeah.
Like that would be interesting.
Yeah, a bit like there's so many things you could do. Yeah, and like try to help clinicians be more data driven. Uh, like even research or like think like kind of collate different. Like there's a product called I think it's called Open Evidence, and so they do like a really interesting search over research articles. So we could do a similar thing, like have different information or guidelines that apply to the patient in front of you. I think the reason I would go that direction to start off with is it helps us make sure that we're referencing like some gold standard reference or something that you trust. Because otherwise, the part that freaks me out is where it's just like a complete black box and you don't know like why it's making the recommendation it's making. Because that's the riskiest kind of category of these tools. Because
Mm.
it may be right, but for 1 in 1,000 times where it's wrong, that can be clinically significant. So I guess it kind of depends on the task. If it's surfacing guidelines or if it's um, care escalation, it's less risky because obviously like we're suggesting like a referral to a GP or something like that. Um, yeah, I think it's something like we'll think carefully about, but definitely really valuable. One also thing I find interesting is like peer-to-peer sort of because like when you're a solo practitioner, you just have no support. You don't know how other clinicians manage the patients that you see. Like you kind of anecdotally do, but you don't know if someone comes in with knee pain, and like a certain constellation of symptoms. Like, how does someone in the Cleveland Clinic manage that patient? So there's a world where Heidi can say, 80% of clinicians that look like you've considered these things, and we can show, and you can turn off and on all these things. Like, you don't have to have
Oh, that's
this,
cool.
but that's a like a quite an interesting like kind of almost like reassurance, I guess, because I like, I remember I worked in the country and you kind of feel a bit alone. Like you don't know if you're making the right decisions or you're way off or, if you're particularly tired or, you know, hungry or angry or late or some combo.
Mm.
Yeah, you can make mistakes. So I would definitely want to have some of those things turned on, but maybe just for my eyes, like I wouldn't include in my note, but it'd be good to know that, all right, you know, some cardiologist has seen a similar patient, done a similar thing, or like an ortho would have managed this patient in a similar way. Like those kinds of things I think are interesting as we get more clinicians using the product.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's making sure that it's got the right information to go off. Like at the moment, if you Googled symptoms of a headache, it would tell you all of these different types of things or possible conditions that it might be associated with. So yeah, it needs to be some sort of way to filter the information that it is
Yeah.
making those recommendations from.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it also like for us building a product, like it has to be a problem that people want solved. Like I think that's the fun part of being a clinician, like figuring out what's going on and making the plan. And you definitely want to have like references, but that's the cool bit. So definitely don't want to ever be replacing that.
Mm.
But if people like we've had lots of people ask, like I'd love to be able to get Heidi to write my note like in a way that it complies with X standard or with these codes or with this referral pathway that I always use. Or so I like the idea of being able to upload some references or guidelines or things that you want Heidi to be able to look at. And then we can apply them into the note. And then there's so many different things. Like with the context one that you mentioned. So like there's an interesting patient side of things where if, like a clinician is using Heidi for that same patient, like maybe they could share some information or something. Anyway, lots of compliance
Yeah.
stickiness around all of this, but yeah, there's lots of different very cool things we can do to make it better for all the users. Yeah.
I can definitely tell you've had this conversation 1 billion times because you're answering like 8 of our questions in one paragraph. You're like, oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
like, yep, that's that question. Because obviously the troubles that we're all facing are very, very similar. I love that idea. I was just thinking, if it was suggested a possible referral pathway, or it was to tie guidelines, and this was an idea a colleague of mine had a while ago. It would be cool to like having AI and research kind of come together, but that would be cool if it was to bring through a guideline like, yep, this person had forefoot pain, they had bruising, acute injury, could be suspicious of a Liz Frank, and here is why, and it links you back to the study. And then as a clinician, you can
Mm.
then go and look in that and read and learn about it, and then it obviously relates to the context. Would be cool. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, 100%. And also, yeah, it's a hard one because, like, as we all know, like practice and planning for patients. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of art. Like it's not
Mm,
100% objective. Like you're trying to pick the right plan for the person in front of you. Even, research, like there's rare that you get 100% consensus on what the right thing to do is for a patient. Sometimes you do, but it's kind of rare. So it's trying to figure out like how do you surface this information, but in a way that isn't annoying.
mm,
Like for example, yeah, let's say that example. It's like, well, like let's say you've said out loud that you're going to investigate a Liz Frank injury, and then the guideline is saying, well, actually, like you probably don't have to investigate yet. Like wait for a few more weeks of forefoot pain before thinking about sending them off for a scan or an ultrasound. Or
yeah.
um, I think that'd just be annoying. So,
Yeah.
so
Just like, shut up. You don't
it's
know what
like
you're talking
go
about.
away. Like
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but it's very exciting because it's like floor raising. I think in Australia the clinicians are amazing, but imagine like for us we now operate across quite a few countries. So there's scenarios where like you're in rural Canada or rural
Mm,
Australia and you're just a nurse and they don't know like do they need to escalate the person or not, like based on what's presenting, what do I do? Like that would be so cool to be able to just point them in the right direction, in some way. It makes a
mm.
lot of sense. Just got to do it right. Yeah.
I know you mentioned that, it would be cool if you could, if there would be something that popped up to say that, yeah, that's 80% of what
Like
other
the little
practitioners would do.
paperclip on the Word document.
Is there any other ways that you have used or you could see Heidi being used as a teaching tool for younger clinicians or
Oh
new
yeah.
graduates?
Yeah, for sure. So actually before Heidi, one of the products that we first experimented with in this kind of AI land back the tutoring history was a OSCE tool. So like no, all of us do OSCEs, but like the clinical exams where you get marked on a checklist. So similar kind of thing, you could we've seen people already create templates. So they can create templates inside of Heidi that will you can use instructions or some placeholders and basically say like, can you add like 3 points or questions or things that maybe would be relevant to ask, like additional things to ask, and often it can fill in a few other ideas. So that's one way. Another really interesting feature, which is I'd say won't commit to the next 3 months, but definitely the next 6 months. So it's on our next couple quarter roadmap to be able to share a session with other clinicians. So to have kind of like a multiplayer sort of mode. So you can imagine, let's say you've just hired a brand new podiatrist or a brand new physio, and you're their mentor in the practice. You could create settings in Heidi so that you can see their sessions, or see some like de-identified version of the sessions. That's something we're working on as well. So you can give them feedback without, the patient being identified. It's a hard one because usually a senior reviewing a junior's notes is kind of within the care team, like it's pretty normal. So we'd let people share it. And then yeah, you could add comments or just like, get in the break room, be like, yeah, I had a look through your notes. They look really good. Or like, here's a couple of pointers here. Or maybe they could request for like a second opinion. So they could say, hey, like, don't know what to do here. And you could either comment back in Heidi or give them a call. Or so yeah, there's lots of really cool things because it's it's almost like a moving picture or something. Like when you make a note, the problem with a note or a letter is that it doesn't actually have the whole visit. It's only got what you put in there. And very often, like my experience working was that there's like some missing piece of information or just like one thing you wish you could ask. Like I just wish like I knew why this person was referred in the first place, or I wish I knew like I know they were specifically worried about something, but I just like it's not in the note. So so imagine like in this case where you're sharing with a senior for teaching, the senior can actually do things like use Ask Heidi and ask questions like, did the patient mention this? Did the patient mention that? So even if it's not in the note, you can like both find evidence in the transcript for things that maybe your junior didn't do, or find evidence the opposite, that they did ask that question, but it was just a negative and hasn't been included in the note or something like that. Yeah, so definitely really useful for teaching. Yeah, that kind of floor raising idea of like having great templates or great guidelines should help improve the documentation of juniors and make sure they don't miss things, or like you can create a template with all the sections and the questions they should ask. And yeah, very excited about this sharing capability, because it makes it more than just like the note that you write in that moment. It lets you do other cool things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Something that I do myself is I'm very rarely in the one clinic room. Like I'm often jumping from the clinic room to the gym, to sometimes outside doing some sprints. I'm often moving around quite frequently. Usually when it's after the initial consult. What's the strategy to overcome that?
Yeah. So we submitted our mobile app on last Friday. We're nearly there. So yeah, a really good mobile experience, I think, is an important part of that. So we've had doctors that pop their phone in their pocket, like their top pocket, or even some complex rigs where they've got like a mic on their lapel and then like the phone pocket or something like that. Yeah, I think that's a good first step to make it a little easier. So you sort of plonk your phone in hearing distance, and just have it catching the transcript in the background.
Is that from the start? Like not just, yeah. Is it a
Yeah,
goal to have it dual so you can have it on your laptop and then bring your phone and have it recording? And can you record and lock it and put it in your phone? I haven't done the phone one yet.
yeah. So the challenge we have at the moment is it's in the browser. So you can still use it, but it's inside of like Safari or Chrome or
Yeah.
whatever you
Yeah.
use on your phone. And there's a few things about that makes it just a tiny bit unstable. So examples are like, let's say for whatever reason, Chrome decides to want to have an update, or you get a
Yeah.
phone call, or trying to think of other good ones.
Just like anything that would take over the mic, like a
Yeah,
message or something.
it's like whenever you listen to like a podcast through a web browser, like it's just a
Yeah.
bit less stable. It usually kind of works, but rather than maybe having an error 1 in 100 times, you might have an error like 1 in 10 times, which
Yeah.
which is for us not acceptable. Like
Yeah.
it should be way better than that. Um, so we have lots of people who use it on their phone today, like as the primary way, and they'll usually have it on their desktop as well, logged in.
Yeah.
But they'll hit refresh and then copy paste from the desktop most often. But they'll use their phone as sort of the microphone.
Mhm.
Um, so the mobile app will make that way better. It'll just be way more stable because it's a proper app, so it's connected to the hard drive of your phone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what kind of happens, it'll still be recording. Even for phone calls, like during the phone call, we can switch it off, and then once you end, we can still reactivate it, whereas that's kind of impossible in a browser.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting, just general question. We're excited maybe in the longer run about devices. There's an interesting opportunity to create like a little mic, or just like a little like a Heidi. I like the idea of like an ID badge that's also a mic. And then you can just click the button and it's starting doing that ambient recording. And it's connected to Heidi, like either through the cloud or just like locally to your phone. And in the background, it's sending it to be transcribed and using exactly the same flow. But the cool thing about that is, yeah, you don't have to worry about like your phone or like using your personal device or like all these different problems. And also, if you don't have a great microphone on your desktop, now you've got a good mic. So yeah, it's definitely something we're thinking about. But yeah, hardware is named hardware for a reason. It's hard, so
Yeah.
Have,
so
have you
yeah,
found you've had to change your like terminology or how you speak during the consult to get more accurate notes?
that's a great question. Hmm.
Can I
So
jump in there just to just quickly add to that? I find because we've been talking about this quite a lot of what's the best way to record and speak about the information. myself and my colleague, we are, you're quite young, you would know what a yapper is. We're going to use that term a bit
Yeah.
more. So I'm typically a yapper anyway to patients. Like I comment on everything, I'm telling them what I'm doing. So I found in that respect, it's my notes are so detailed
Mm.
versus my colleague. Who isn't as much of a yapper, they're not as detailed. But
Yeah.
if we're doing like an exercise program, which is on an app, I'm saying, great, we're doing 3 sets of 8 isometric. I'm looking to them, and I would do this anyway. So I found it's been a bit easier
Mm.
for me. But I found also it does, because I know they're going to the nodes. It's so mentally I'm trying to figure out how that's going to be recorded, but I'm trying to say it in somewhat medical terms, but also layman terms. So it's almost like a bit of a challenge in a
Mm.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's a kind of it's a hard thing to wrap your head around, but really you have to imagine like if you like your twin was trapped inside the computer and it was trying to write what you wanted to write, and all it could do is hear like what you were saying, but it can't see, then what would you say to make sure that they write what you write? So yeah, I think that's the most common thing, and most commonly obviously around examination, where like you're seeing things, but you're not always saying them out loud. That's why we tried to improve that with the little additions area, so you can pop a couple of notes in or things that you
Mm,
want to pop in, or
mm,
context that like Heidi can't get, like maybe they're really underweight and like you're worried about frailty or something
mm.
that's something you're not going to say to the patient.
Yeah,
I,
I just
yeah.
sorry, I just add to that for the context of musculoskeletal people. Like something I've been adding is someone's a bit more like catastrophizing or kinesiophobic, a bit more fear of movement. I'm not going to say to someone, you're catastrophizing your heel pain right now. That wouldn't go down too well. But I might comment in the additions note to say, fear and worried about progression of heel pain or fear of not being able to get back to what they want to be able to do. So that's just an example in musculoskeletal podiatry physio land I found works well.
Exactly.
I'm
And
actually
then so Blake, like little Blake inside the computer is like, oh, okay, I'm not that worried about like the 7 million things that the patient said about their heel.
yeah.
So it's like that's why often sometimes in our marketing we talk about like an AI resident or like a
Mm.
co-pilot. It's like it's a little weird, but it is like almost kind of giving Heidi the context that
Yeah.
you have to be able to get it to do what you want. I think like I only want it to have a positive impact. Like I don't want yeah, to use your words, like someone who isn't fluent in Japanese or or
Yeah.
whatever. Um like I don't want to have them to have to change their practice. The only thing is they might find that it won't do as well for them. So they can always when you click stop on Heidi, you can actually just click resume and you can just verbally add your context. So you can just say something like along the lines of like patient just walked out of the room, here's some additional context, and then just give it the context, or uh another way to achieve it is in the template. So you can say in the template like usually in round brackets, like I usually don't read out loud my examination findings, so like please interpret the transcript best you can to include the findings that might
Yeah.
be there, or something like that, because we out of the box, like the free templates and some of the stock stuff, we try to keep it from being too creative. Like we don't want it to add things or
Mm.
invent things that aren't there. But for some clinicians, that's actually a feature, not a bug. Like that's a good thing because you want it to be a bit more creative. Like 95% of the time, if you were stuck inside the computer and you were trying to like kind of guess what was going on, it's actually good in most cases to let it do that
Mm.
rather than be like, no, like every time, only if it's explicitly mentioned, because then you're limiting it to being based on what the transcript is, which it has to be perfect.
Mm.
Anyway, sorry, getting into a bit of nuanced stuff,
No,
but
it's good. It's good. We want to have as much as physically possible because we
yeah.
want to be able to, like, we want to obviously talk and I guess talk about it to people and show how it's helped us. And I want to be able to feel
Hmm,
comfortable answering all questions like
of
that. And
course. Yeah.
it is good. Like I had an example because it's in my mind, I'm like, it's the critique I've heard from other people as well, which is fairly true. Like, it makes you lazy, it makes you a worse clinician because it's just doing the notes for you. You don't check it, you hit save, it's fine, all that's done. I'll look at it later, I don't even bother reading it. The next time I come in, I don't even know what I did because I didn't write them down. And that is certainly valid, but there's lots of things in our lives that are potentially making us more lazy. So the critique and that principle applies everywhere. You still have to, so I guess it does come down to you a little bit or mostly comes down to you. You still have to check the final notes, and if it doesn't say what you want it to say, changing that sentence here or there or changing that paragraph for me, it might take an extra couple of minutes, but that's far better than taking 20, 25, 30 minutes or, us trying to go for a coffee on a Saturday and I'm writing my notes, which I typically do on the weekend. So, like that, I feel like you are the person that says, this is okay. This is what we spoke about. So, yeah, it's helpful in that respect. And I've found the opposite when I come back. There are things that I have spoken about that I did speak about clearly and they're accurate, but I actually forgot that I had spoken to them.
Mm.
And I know previously I wouldn't have said it in that much detail because it's even easier for me to interpret. Like sometimes I've written notes and I'm like, okay, that's what I meant. I had to think about it a bit. But with the generator, it's a lot clearer. So
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's more of like it's almost like a societal question. Like a lot of so the knee-jerk reaction to innovation is usually that's the point. Like,
yeah,
like when manufacturing got more automated, people said the same thing. Like we'd lose our skills, we won't know how to build things anymore. Like, mechanics will be out of the job because, cars are going to be like perfectly built. Yeah. But really what happens is you get like higher leverage of your human skills. Like the things
yeah,
that clinicians are great at and we love is the human part, the problem solving, the making the person feel better at the end of the day. The documentation is like is a chore that came with records and medical legal chasing and
mm,
like 50 years ago, like my old GP used to have literally like the old card system. That was the way he wrote notes, and like he had every note from when I was a baby, and literally like it was like one dot point, like ask
wow,
or like it was very compressed, so he could look
I
through like
can picture it. I
yeah.
feel like, yeah. I
Um,
remember
and, and
that.
and he had just the best time, right? Like no EHR, like all paper. He
yeah,
was not fussed about documentation. I can guarantee he wasn't like remote accessing in on a weekend. He was just enjoying his life. So I think I I hope that these tools just make being a clinician a better job, because there's heaps of burnout and it doesn't take much to see the stats about how often people are moving out of their profession because they just find it taxing. Like it's a lot to see so many people and to like take on their problems, and I think that's enough to deal with and have to deal with like 3
yeah.
hours of documentation burden that comes with it every day.
Yeah, and that's cool.
Yeah, I agree. So I wanted to hear your like how you would recommend Heidi will run. So let's say for private practice clinicians listening, I'm sitting in the patient room, sorry, sitting in my clinic room. I'm about to go out and grab the patient. How are you recommending, and I'll just give you an idea of how I'm doing it so far, is I'll hit start record, I'll walk out, say, great, Blake, come in, sit down, we'll speak about the consent, speak about the general consult, we'll go through it all. I take them out into the big gym. It doesn't obviously record that. I take them back. We'll talk about everything we do in the clinic room. And then I'll say, great, I'm going to see you in a couple of weeks. And then as we go to get up, I'll open it and hit stop, take them out. And then I'll just quickly come back and just check that it's transcribed. And then usually at lunch or at a break, or if I have a little bit more time in the appointment, I'll get it to generate the note. And then this will be the second follow-up question is I will then check that it's all right, check that it's fine, check it's what I said, and then I'll put it into, we use Clinico, then I'll put it into Clinico,
Yeah.
make sure it's all fine again, and that obviously would be because the information's just been copy and pasted, then hit save as final. So my question is, how do you expect it to run? What's the most efficient way for a clinician to use it? And when are you going to come a part of Clinico? Because once you become a part of Clinico, I don't want to say I'm really rooting for Heidi, but I'll probably do anything you ever ask me because there goes like 8 hours back in my whole life. They copied and pasted. And that's the other question we got quite a lot
Yeah.
is when does it integrate with the practice management software?
Yeah. Yeah. So I can say, so we literally started writing code to integrate with Clinico
Is that
Monday.
the first one? Clinico's got to be the most popular.
Yeah, wait, one of the first ones. Yeah, most popular by
You're on
far.
Clinico too.
Yeah, Clinico.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
and Clinico is so good because they have an amazing open standard. Like had a good chat with the I think the founder and the partnership team. Anyway, so I think we'll see. Maybe the first version will just be like a button you can click
Yeah,
and it'll go into the right place. But they also have like a side widget kind of thing, so you can set it up so that maybe you don't even have to have another window.
yeah,
Yeah, that might come later, but definitely the preference is that you just stay inside Clinico. You don't have to have another browser open, and that'll be better for bugs and things that go wrong because you actually have it there, so we can actually say, hey, like we don't hear you, or if something goes wrong, we're in front of you.
yeah.
Um, Workflow wise, what you said sounds perfect. So sometimes people are a bit scared to click start beforehand, like they're worried that the silence or the length or something will stuff it up. Definitely not the case. So yeah, strongly recommend like just start it. It's actually fine to leave it running kind of indefinitely in and around you walking in and out, and that's exactly how you should do it. Um, the Yeah, different workflows depends on like how your schedule is set. So if you have like a little bit of room to do it alongside your visits, then you can do all those tasks during, but you can always come back and do it at the end of the day as well. Um, yeah, I'd say that's pretty common. Like so most people will click stop. They'll either save a default template, so they'll pick one that they like and they've set up, or they'll use one of the free ones, which is fine too. And then uh, yeah, copy pasting. I think that's all pretty similar. Trying to think of other things that people do. Depends on your workflow quite a lot. Like some people that create other documents downstream, thing I'd suggest that people don't always do. So if you are paying for Heidi and you've got all the custom templates and everything, um, I know it's a bit annoying, but just spend a bit of time creating lots of different templates because it will save you so much time. It's kind of like the macros or like the forward slash key type of stuff you can do in different EHRs. Similar kind of idea. I think if you spend the time to build a template that's very detailed and has like lots of instructions, if then statements like of how you want different conditions structured, that's where it goes from like, oh yeah, this is cool to like this is mind blowing.
Yeah.
So again, this is a more of a doctor example, but we have a urologist who he sees patients who have prostate cancer, and he has kind of like 5 different kinds of visits that he routinely does for people with prostate cancer. It's like a first visit, counseling visit, a surveillance a visit, and he's built this like the most complicated template to basically do all this tasks that he would do. So calculate like the prostate risk scores, calculate this and that. And it's all he's like, first do this, then second use that information to fill this. So you can do a lot of um like different scoring of injuries, different risk calculations. Like there's a lot of things that you can pull off,
Mm.
but it just takes the investment and time. But usually what people do is click stop and then they'll pick from their set of templates whichever one they like, and then generates out, check it for errors. One little tip is that the way our document creation works, it uses your note as the source of truth. So really, you don't have, I mean, of course you should check everything, but you shouldn't have to check for clinical accuracy on downstream documents. If your note is accurate,
Yeah.
then your downstream documents are going to be like one in a million times it'll be wrong, and that's why we have insurance. So your documents that are derivative, the thing that will be different is like how it's written the letter or the grammar maybe there's different sentences you want to change, but like the facts of that will be identical to what's in the note. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, I think that workflow makes sense. Like just be you can like Heidi isn't actually that brittle. Like you can record a lot. Same thing with the phone. Like even if you were using it on the phone and you want to
Mm.
record for 2 hours or 2.5 hours of like lots of different encounters and things, you can do it. Like we've had scenarios where people have accidentally recorded like 5 sessions in one or something, and then using templates and Ask Heidi, you can separate all the different notes inside that one
Wow, that's
transcript.
cool. Yeah,
Um,
I've done that by
yeah,
accident and left it on because you just forget to hit stop record.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, even in those cases, like if you're ever having trouble, just message us and we'll help. usually takes a couple of hours unless it's like red emergency, then we'll put you at the top of the queue. But
Yeah.
yeah, we can help you recover things or split the transcript in different ways. Like I said, we can't like read the transcript or see what you did, but we can run some different algorithms to try to get you the note the way you want it. Yeah.
Yeah. And does it learn? Does it learn as it goes? It is.
Yeah. So we store the way we it works is it stores like it's like a memory of what you've done, like what your edits are. Now, completely transparently, it's still not perfect yet. It's quite hard to make it work really well.
Mm.
Like even the biggest companies that are working in AI don't do memory particularly well because there's this problem where, and like we're trying to stay away from, there's this problem where you like not every edit you want to learn from. And it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to know what's an edit of like preference. So like what's something where you're changing style or there's a medicine name or there's something that like you okay, forever if going forward when you use Heidi, you want that modified. That's fine. That's kind of straightforward. That's the first. So we'll ship pretty soon a way for you to pick a section or a sentence and swap it for something else. And then every time Heidi sees that again, we'll just do a direct swap. So that's kind of easy. The hard thing is, yeah, more like coded preferences. It's really hard to do well. And I really don't like, again, it's a taste thing, but I don't like systems where there's hidden behaviors that you don't control. So an example would be you've done 100 notes. We've stored all these things about how you like your notes. Like one time, you guys deleted this part of an exam. Another time you deleted this part of the exam. But you end up with all these conflicting rules. So so you have like, okay, one time he deleted this, but then the other time he included it. Then another time the note was quite brief, and then another time he included a more detailed statement. And what's in there is really like all the nuance of being a clinician. Sometimes you need to be more detailed and verbose because the patient wants a summary and you're being really detailed. Other times it's a patient who's seen 700 times and you just want to be brief because the next time you read that note, you just want the information to be dense. Um, so yeah, the truth is we're still figuring it out
Mm.
how to like ship it as a feature that's easy to understand, you're in control of, but actually does make meaningful improvement in the way it writes. But we are behind the scenes. So the way we do it today is for different specialties we look at in an aggregate way. This is back to that aggregate de-identified data. So we look in like an aggregate way at all of the edits and behaviors that are there, and then we try to modify templates and modify some of the voice settings and other things so that in a kind of macro way, it's improving the product. Um, and then in the next, let's say, yeah, half a year, there'll be lots of little things you can do to store preferences that are more permanent. And then store like a working memory, like where you work, websites you go to, guidelines back is a similar kind of idea. Like you want to have like a bank of things that are semi-permanent that you can add to Heidi to make it better for you. Uh, yeah, again, a bit in the weeds, but building these tools is kind of hard. And we're at the scale now doing, like so many sessions that even small changes or small things can have big swings. And the challenge we have is, you guys are young and more on the tech savvy side, but we have GPs who've like stopped keyboarding as they call it,
Mm.
which they love. Like, it's surprising. Like actually some of the older clinicians love Heidi more than anyone else because they type so slowly. So they love it. But for them to try to figure out like memory and personalization and rules,
Yeah.
it's a bit
Yeah.
much. But yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll have a way for you to probably turn it on, I think. And then once we turn it on, you can see the difference. Like you'll be able to pick, okay, this is like block sounded, this is personalized, you pick which one you want. Yeah, something like that. Makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. One challenge for me. I don't know if you found this when usually you would see someone like, yeah, I get it's sore first thing in the morning, jot it down, AM paid, morning stiffness. Whereas now it's going to be recorded pretty straightforward. So it's like, I'm just going to look at you and really listen to you, so sometimes I've actually found, which has been so odd. I feel like
I don't usually write my notes while I'm talking to my patient
really,
anyway.
I
We've
think
talked about
are we
this
only
before.
yeah, okay. Like I'll just jot down a couple of things.
Mm.
So I feel like I'm just the guy on the computer. I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm not even typing anything. You look at my screen, I'm just hitting keyboards. But I know
Yeah.
I've done stuff, but like it's a different way to practice in the
Yeah.
sense of taking notes. But I've found myself after that, I was like, I'm just going to jot down the really main points that I probably would anyway, and then I just kind of add that in. So I'm getting a combination of both, and it's written out pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I quite like the idea. That was another reason we did additions. So we do have some doctors who will write and all sorts of different trying to think of good use cases where basically they'll use that additions tab to write all sorts of bits and pieces in. So and that addition stays. So even if you wrote a whole note in additions, we're still going to use that as context to kind of enrich it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to you. Like some people uh, like we have like a couple of physios and speech paths and others that actually do the transcript somewhere else, or they write the note in, they actually paste like a whole transcript into Heidi in additions and then generate a note that way. So it's kind of flexible. Like the good thing about documenting the note that I like, and I have tried it in practice as well, is like sometimes there is some benefit to doing a bit of synthesis, like thinking through like or like as you're thinking live, you can make some notes like, okay, this is making me think of that, this is making me think of this. And it does help give Heidi some directional information about like what you were thinking at the time.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it's an interesting one. Like I think I think there's some benefit to having a little notepad or something. Jot
Yeah.
like jot down some ideas or things you're thinking of. Like I don't want to disrupt that bit, but just like the process of like kind of the charade of writing a note for some lawyer that's going to go through my EHR in the future, we'd try and get rid of that. But the part where you're thinking and trying to figure out what's going on, that we want that to stay. Um,
Yeah, I like that. I like the core values stay the same, and we need to always be critical of anything that comes into medicine and health, but that can't be a reason not to potentially try things as long as we're trying to foresee what could happen, and then when things do happen, we try to evolve and change. It's never going to be perfect, I imagine, ever, or certainly at this stage, it just continues to improve like anything in healthcare.
yeah, yeah, and I think it sort of goes back to what we spoke about earlier. Like I think a lot of people, their default in medicine is to have like a negative sum view, like how this is going to damage or reduce the quality, but actually, like a positive sum view would be what's the cost of not using one of these tools? Like, are you going to leave the career earlier?
Mm,
Are you going to miss or forget details for patients, like actually pretty broadly? Are you going to document things incorrectly?
mm.
Um, there's a lot of evidence coming out that the humans documenting are much worse than things like Heidi. It's not Heidi yet. We've got some different studies going, but
Yeah.
um, I think what will end up happening is like pretty much most clinicians will use something like this pretty quickly, and then it'll come down to I think it's still ultimately like why we get paid to be clinicians is to we're still liable for the tools we use, but it should just make the job more enjoyable. That's the thing. Like if we're not doing that, then like Heidi will just go out of business. That's the whole point. We're serving the clinicians, trying to make it better to do your job every day.
Mm,
I think it'll be clear over time that will improve quality. You'll be less burnt out. You'll have better documentation, better recall of what's going on
mm.
soon, better access to guidelines or support. So yeah, it's there's always going to be curmudgeons. Like there's always like there's an adoption cycle of any software. There's always a group that never want to use it, refuse to use it until like the last dying moment. Like I
Yeah.
worked with some surgical profs that retired when RMH brought in an EHR just because they didn't believe philosophically that doctors should use computers. So it's yeah, it's fine. Like it comes with the territory.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty confident that like from our experience in the last few years that it's going to have a really positive impact. It's
Yeah.
something worth giving a try. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, the one that gets reported the most is just the time that you get back. I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
if you ask any private practice clinician, any of you out there, please come and find me. If your hours are scheduled 9 to 5, I don't think there is anyone on earth that really says when they finish at 5 o'clock, all the letters are done, all the notes are done, all the follow-ups are done, all the patient emails and stuff are all done every single day. Like if you can get closer
Yeah.
to that, surely life becomes a bit easier. I was talking example with our admin today where I used Heidi for an initial and I generated a report after it, and that was done. And then when it was lunchtime, when I would usually do the end of that report, I was actually able to call another patient to talk about their imaging results and get them back in. And I obviously wouldn't have been able to do that because I just didn't have time. So it
Yeah.
just kind of you kind of kick the can down the road with these things like, oh yeah, I don't have to do the report today. I'll get it done tomorrow. But it's like, no, I can get it done today, and I can start my day fresh as
Mm.
I usually do on Monday. So I've really loved that.
Yeah. And I know, and like maybe one last thing in the kind of product roadmap that we haven't spoken about is exactly that. So being integrated in your record is really important. So that's like a basic kind of housekeeping thing we have to do, and we want to do as well. But what I'm really excited about is there's definitely a world where you can set up Heidi to be like a little AI worker for you across softwares doing different tasks. So you can imagine like from a visit, there's a certain amount of jobs to be done that occur. And you there's no reason, like I don't see why you can't set Heidi to not only do writing, but also draft emails in Gmail or like go across different all sorts of different softwares to literally like you click a button like, yeah, approved, approved, approved. And then Heidi runs off and literally while you go get the next patient, like drafts all those actions for you and opens the next patient. Um,
Cool.
because because the AI models that are coming out, code is language. So language models are really, really good at figuring out code just by coincidence. And everything we use that's on a computer is there's some underlying code. So,
Mm.
I'm talking to you now that there's code running software that's in processing all of that. So even on your computer, like you can run a model that can move the mouse and click things and do things for you. So it's again, that's like bleeding edge. That's definitely like more on the sci-fi side of things. But again, it just gets back to the same thing. Like all of these administrative tasks, painful things, going to gather context, like calling doctors or calling officers or imaging to get context. Like, definitely a world where Heidi is making that call for you and like gathering context and getting it sent back. Obviously not it's not the clinician, but like where something is super administrative in nature, and I bet you on the other side, not that long from now, the radiology will have an AI that's talking to Heidi.
I was just saying in my mind, I'm like, oh, I could just generate imaging and I just fill out the location, the type of imaging, and
Yeah,
I just sign it. Then it feels like it just pulls patient details, my details, which is automatically, I know people already
yeah,
have them set up in their clinic anyway, and then you fill out that stuff. That's interesting.
exactly. Yeah, and again, like you don't have to use all this stuff. It's like for some people that'd be amazing, for some people it'd be too weird. It's always going to be in service of what you're trying to do. But yeah, I think we covered off most things pretty well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
that was
got there.
great. Thanks so much, Tom.
Yeah, thank you so much
No
for
worries.
coming on. And obviously, we'll have details, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that stuff down in the bio. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and just giving some nuance to a pretty emerging topic, of course, but
Mm.
something that we definitely believe is going to help in time and burnout. And it's just good to talk about the questions that you probably don't get to ask in this context from the person that obviously has the idea.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, guys. It was so good.